Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Today, we got a lot to talk about. Cam Heyward's extension, we'll get to talking about that. But I want to talk about how Mike Tomlin continues to talk about this offensive line as if it's in flux with all the injuries it's dealt with that. To talk about that with me, we've got Brooke Pryor from ESPN. We got a lot to talk about with her on Cam Heyward, maybe Pat Freiermuth's extension, and Tomlin seems cool with the wide receiver situation. All here on Wednesday's Locked On NFL, Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things of the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook is the #1 sportsbook in America. And right now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. As I said before, we're joined by the woman herself, Brooke Pryor, the Steelers beat reporter for ESPN. Brooke, it's great to have you back on the show. We're both out of camp. I think we're both happy for that. And it's week 1. We've got news to get to, and we'll get to that. But I think one of the biggest questions about this Steeler team that never solidified this in the preseason is what's happening with the offensive line. Troy Fautanu got hurt. Broderick Jones wasn't playing that well. Zach Frazier did get that, though. Zach Frazier starting was the one thing they solidified. But now Isaac Seumalo's hurt. And it just seems like this was a group that was supposed to take a collective step forward, and we still don't know what they're even really going to look like.
Yeah, I think that the offensive line was supposed to be such a strength of this team because they invested, first round pick last year in Broderick Jones, first round pick this year in Troy Fautanu, and added Zach Frazier and Mason McCormick. I mean, they have invested so many resources in this, but injuries are unavoidable. And unfortunately for the Steelers, they've happened at kind of the worst time when you're trying to form this base, this foundational base of the offensive line for the whole offense, especially when you look at who Arthur Smith is as an offensive coordinator. They want to run it through the trenches. They want to have a strong run game. They want to have a strong play action game. All of that becomes a lot harder if you have an offensive line that's in flux, especially when you have a quarterback like Russell Wilson, who is maybe not as mobile as Justin Fields. I think that the Fautanu injury is the one that's having the most impact. I think that while Seumalo is obviously the most veteran guy on that line, a really steady presence, I think that Spencer Anderson's going to be okay. And maybe that's just because I am an optimist. But I think that he's really impressed me with his versatility, which was funny. He talked about that, saying that had kind of gotten mundane, that people were like, oh yeah, Spencer Anderson, he's a versatile offensive lineman. Yeah. But I do think that the fact that he's a 7th round pick, he was on the active roster all of last year. He played in 8 games. He got a lot of reps in camp at different positions. I think that this position specialization is going to help him find a solid role in the line, but it's also, I think, going to help his development. And to me, it speaks volumes that he's stuck around and had this many roles as a 7th round rookie last year. He also happened to be the first guy to really hang out with Russell Wilson in public after Russ signed with the Steelers. So it's funny the way that worked out. But the Fautanu injury created this ripple effect, right? Where the Steelers said back during owners meetings, I believe it was, if not during the draft draft prep, that they saw Broderick Jones as a left tackle. They wanted to move him to the left side. So it kind of felt like it was all building toward that. And then at some point it became, well, he's going to move to left tackle at some point. We don't know what that is, but he will move there eventually because we think that Fautanu is going to be right tackle. Okay, great. But then in camp, I believe it was Broderick and Fautanu that rotated mostly at right. Dan Moore was still pretty solidly on the left. So huge credit to Dan Moore to continue to hold on to his job, because I think that he's someone that Steelers fans at least have audibly wanted this team to move on from him. he's played pretty well. Like, he's not a flashy left tackle by any means. I don't think that he's one of the top 5-10 left tackles in the league, but he's serviceable. And because of that, it's hard for the Steelers to move on from a guy that is as solid as he has been. And now that Fautanu's hurt, it kind of, I think, has stilted Broderick's progress to move to the left side because they have to have him at right. And because Troy got hurt in that first preseason game, that I think really hurt a lot of his development and time that he needs on the line to get adjusted and get the line gelled and everything. And as a rookie, to miss that much time, it's hard to jump on the moving train.
It is.
Once the season starts. He said he's taken a lot of mental reps, but there's some things I think that you can't test until you're in and playing on that line. So that injury, I think, has been the most significant obstacle to getting this line in a place that it really needs to be for week one.
Yeah, it's funny. A few things to address there. You're the way you talked about Spencer Anderson, I thought it was very accurate with why there's confidence in him. Mike Tomlin even compared him to Kelvin Beachum. For those who might forget, Kelvin Beachum was a 7th-round pick, much like Spencer Anderson, who became a versatile piece for the Steelers. And in the Marquise Pouncey, David DeCastro era, the early part of that era, he wound up finding a place for him at tackle and then got a big contract somewhere else. Not saying that Spencer Anderson is going to do that, but to get that comparison from Mike Tomlin, that's a good thing because Beachum was a pretty good piece and had a pretty good NFL career. But to your point, this Fautanu thing, it was kind of like a stick of dynamite or a wrench in the gears that just blew everything up and kind of slowed everything down. And it's kind of forced the Steelers to be in this point. I want our audience to be able to listen to hear or watch if you're on YouTube. Here's Mike Tomlin at the different points in his press conference on Tuesday talking about this offensive line. And it's not like he's nervous about it, but it's an obvious state of they are kind of just working with what they have and they're figuring it out. But here's Mike Tomlin addressing different points in the offensive line.
Mike, how would the makeup of your offensive line look in regards to your tackles relative to maybe Troy's health?
We'll determine that as we get closer to game time. He was a partial participant yesterday. It went well. We expect it to be more so tomorrow. And so the closer he gets to health, we'll have a better reflection of how we might divvy that up. But obviously the first two guys are going to be participants. He potentially could be as well. And Spencer Anderson has played some tackle in the past as well. I think those are the candidates, and what the mix is will be determined by how we distribute reps and how they, perform in those reps given.
Mike, and with the depth of your offensive line kind of tested over these last few weeks, how have you seen the group still come together in terms of cohesion when, they've had to deal with this depth tested?
We got a lot of young guys in there, and so there's a lot of meat on that growth bone, and we've seen a lot of it, to be quite honest with you, for several reasons. We had some young guys that we drafted high in the draft that shown that the NFL is not too big for them, and I'd imagine they'll continue to show that and continue to grow with exposure. But we also got some second-year players like Broderick and Spencer, and that second lap around the track is reasonable to expect growth and development because of the knowing component. And so we've challenged them in that regard, and they've responded. We got some talented young people, and so it makes for an exciting mix, certainly.
Mike, have you determined which side you think Broderick will fit best on, at least to start out the season?
No, I made no determinations regarding that. Obviously, he's worked a lot at right. But again, we're going to continue to watch that as we progress through the week because versatility has been an asset for him and us.
So a few things there, Brooke. You hear Mike Tomlin saying that, hey, they're going to wait for Troy Fautanu to be fully back before they start making, solidified decisions. Broderick Jones still don't know where he's actually going to line up here. All this fits into what you and I are talking about. This offensive line still isn't what it's supposed to, what it's eventually going to be, I think, when it is solidified. And it finds the identity that it's been meant to and drafted to be to build for the future.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm still so hung up on him saying meat on that growth bone. That is just, it was like his brain short-circuited and he just threw in a bunch of Tomlinisms all at once. And that's when you realize
poof.
He's really good at saying a lot without saying anything at all. Like Tuesdays are just an exercise in word salad. Because I think the interesting thing is too, when he talks about, we're not sure where Broderick's going to go. Broderick himself said multiple times last week that he was pretty sure he was going to start out on the right side. So I think, this is a gamesmanship thing from Mike Tomlin, although I don't think Raheem Morris is being kept up at night thinking about if Broderick Jones is going to be on the right side or left side. Yes, I think it's absolutely right. This is not the final form that the offensive line is going to take. But the thing that I am concerned about in the long run here is Broderick Jones' development. I mean, he's drafted to be a left tackle. Understandable that he ends up working his way in on the field last year at right. But it really felt like this offseason was when they needed to shift him over, and they just couldn't do it for whatever reason, whether or not they didn't want to give the reins to a rookie at right tackle from the jump, and they wanted to make him feel like he was competing for it. And Dan Moore's been pretty vocal saying that he doesn't want to be right tackle. I think that they just had an awkward situation because of numbers and because of this indecisiveness. And I think that moving from left to right is not an insignificant thing. I mean, talking with Dan Morris said it. I think it was Spencer Anderson said it today. Like, playing either side, the difference is like wiping your butt with your left hand versus your right hand. And like, I'm not going to mimic that right now, but if you're listening and you feel so led, try it. It feels weird. Like when you're doing it with the non-dominant hand, it's like, oh, that's not right. Like you can do it, but it's just different. And so I think for Broderick Jones, he's a natural left tackle. He struggled at right. He's struggling wiping with the other hand. And it's, I think that it led to some of the issues that you saw in that second preseason game when he gave up those sacks. He played better in the next one, which is encouraging. And he was good last year. But I think that it's probably confusing in some ways for him that he's not having this linear development. It's, hey, you're going to learn this. Now you're going to learn this. Just kidding. You're going to go back and learn this. And maybe eventually you'll go back over here and learn this other thing. But it is a lot easier to ruin a good player in the NFL than it is to nurture them and develop them into being good players. That's a thing commonly said about quarterbacks, but I think you can say it for just about any position in the NFL.
I agree that is a big challenge. And until we see it really develop from Broderick Jones, we're not sure about the Steelers' plan right now, and we're not sure when he'll be at left tackle if he gets there this year. I mean, if Troy Fautanu coming back changes the lineup, I don't think there's a guarantee that Broderick Jones goes to left with the way Dan Moore's played and the way Broderick Jones has played. But again, they are in flux, and there is a lot to figure out there. I want to get the Cam Heyward situation because that is the big news of the day, if you will. We'll get Brooke's thoughts on that in a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Brooke Pryor, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. A reminder, you can make all sorts of bets on FanDuel Sportsbook, including win projections on the AFC North. Right now, the Ravens and the Bengals both are tied at 10.5 wins, while the Steelers and the Browns both are tied at 8.5 wins. Who goes over? Who goes under? Place your bets with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We also have something a little different for you this year. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to download America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter here with Brooke Pryor of ESPN. Brooke, want to get your thoughts on the Cam Heyward situation. It is a 3-year extension, which means adding on to this season. $16 million of that is guaranteed. Granted, he's $16 million in base salary this year, so that kind of works out already. But it's $45 million of new money over those next 3 years. So pans out like a $15 million a year per average. This year, he's a $22.4 million cap hit. Was this the move you expected from Omar Khan and the Steelers? Because Cam Heyward's 35, coming off an injury that nagged him all season, and there were a lot of big questions. Could he be Cam Heyward for more than just another year or two?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a deal that satisfies both sides. It is somewhat of a compromise because I think that the way I'm interested to see the actual structure of the deal and what the last 2 years, how those work, what the dead cap is, things like that. Because if the guaranteed money is $16 million and he was set to make $16 million, yes, there is new money, but not really, if that makes sense. Like it
does.
They have the option essentially to pay him more if they want, if he keeps playing at a high level. It also gives him the opportunity to retire as a Steeler. I mean, I think that he's been pretty clear all along that that's what he wants. He said, I want to be a one helmet guy. I want to win a Super Bowl here. All of these things that he knows, he's in the twilight of his career. He's got 1 to 3 more years left, which is why he is now locked in through the 2026 season. But I think that this gives him the security to know that there is a place for him in Pittsburgh. And it also gives the Steelers the flexibility to reward him essentially for playing ball, for, sticking through the process, for, not creating a spectacle of holding out or anything. He missed some OTAs, didn't miss anything that was required of him. Practice, did everything that he was supposed to do. He's been a captain 10 times. This is what you do for a guy that has meant so much to an organization, especially, he's been kind of an under the radar guy the whole time in this organization, at least nationally speaking. I think he's very underrated, and the Steelers did right by him while also not giving away their future for a guy that's 35. I mean, the reality of that is that's kind of a senior citizen in football years. They're not contracts that are
Don't
given
let Cam
out.
hear you say that, Brooke.
I know. Listen, and we all see the gray. I get mine highlighted to cover mine up, but we see it. So, but yeah, I think that it's a great deal that gives him the insurance, gives the Steelers the flexibility. I think that that's about as good as you could have hoped this situation to resolve itself.
I agree, because I wasn't 100% sure. I felt like Cam was doing things the right way for a reason. Cam wouldn't just be showing up out of blind. I think there was some trust on both sides that, hey, you show up, you show us that you're healthy, you attend all the things, you'll be fine. And that it turned out that way. And now, if you're the Steelers, you now keep Cam Heyward. He's not at an outrageous price. He's now like a more moderate, really good veteran player on your team. If he gets back to where he was 2 years ago, he's being underpaid frankly, for what they're keeping him for. But I think the real thing that's the advantage for the Steelers is here's this shining example of, hey, look at Cam Heyward. He was a team captain for more than a decade. He's in his 14th season. And guess what? He showed up to mini camp and training camp, and he did all the things, and he never complained, and he didn't, and he said some things in OTAs, but then quickly put that away, and he followed the shield. And guess what? He got the deal that he really wanted, and he signed long-term, and now he gets to retire as Steeler. So you, future Steeler that wants to sign a big contract, whether it be George Pickens or Pat Freiermuth, who we'll talk about in a second, or anybody else that's down the line, maybe TJ Watt in a couple years, or Minka Fitzpatrick, look at how Cam Heyward was handled. And then look at how Le'Veon Bell was handled when he held out and then didn't even play a whole season. I think on top of Cam Heyward's play itself, I think this is another kind of notch the Steelers can show as an example. Hey, play ball with us. You'll get what's coming to you and what you deserve, and we'll work with you. But don't play ball with us. Give us a hard time. Yeah, it might not work out the way that you want it to.
Yeah, 100%. I think that they've used Cam as an example in that organization for a long time because he has done things the right way. He's one of the last members of the old guard, so to speak, in terms of he was drafted, 2011? He's been around a while. He has seen a lot of things. He hasn't won a Super Bowl, which Mike Tomlin has talked about wanting to win confetti for guys like Cam Heyward. And I think that this is something that the Steelers, again, will use, like you said, as another measuring point, knowing that I think that Cam Heyward is an old school player, and this was an old school contract negotiation in a lot of ways. He, wasn't a distraction. He didn't post videos of himself like working out away from the facility, all of this stuff. It was quiet. It was under the radar in the way the Steelers like to be. And I think that they kind of hope that every negotiation will be like that. And like you mentioned, in situations like Le'Veon Bell, it's not.
Exactly. I think that's the situation there. And a perfect situation, I think, where the Steelers are still trying to figure that out with somebody is Pat Freiermuth. Now, Pat Freiermuth is not 35 years old. In fact, he's like more like 26, 27 right now. He's about to enter his prime. He's at the end of his rookie deal. And to me, I thought this would be the easier deal of the two to finalize because Cam Heyward's older. If you're Omar Khan, you're thinking, man, we need to get younger. We need to figure out who the stars of the future are. Pat Freiermuth looks like he could be that. But granted, Pat Freiermuth has not blown up in any of the Matt Canada-led offenses that he's played in so far. So I could see maybe some disagreements right now from Pat Freiermuth's camp that's like, hey, he's been held back, obviously, by the quarterback play, by the coordinator situation, by everything in general. And the Steelers are like, yeah, but at the same time, you can't pay him Travis Kelce money until he produced Travis Kelce results. And so I can see if there's a hang up there. Or, Brooke, do you think that might be the hang up as there's negotiations that aren't going well? Or could this just be like, hey, you know what? The Steelers had like a laundry list of things to get done, like considering the Ayuk trade and all this other stuff. And now it's just going to happen in its own time.
That's what I think is that it's going to happen in its own time.
Okay.
Combined with the fact that he hasn't produced these game-changing numbers in his first season on the Steelers, largely because of factors outside of his control. He's had some soft tissue injuries. He had Matt Canada as his offensive coordinator. There are a lot of extenuating circumstances with him, and I think the Steelers have to decide, do we want to pay him for what he's already done, or are we comfortable paying him with what we think he'll do? And it feels like a lot of times in the NFL, it's guys get paid for what they've already done, which can be really frustrating. And that's how you end up with quarterbacks on insanely bloated deals down the line. Like Ben Roethlisberger having a cap hit of $45 million in his last year. You have to find the right balance of paying a guy market value without completely, blowing up your cap to keep him around. And I think that also because we don't know exactly how this Arthur Smith offense is going to look, exactly how Pat Freiermuth is going to operate within it, we have an idea. He should be a really big factor. He does all the things that Arthur Smith wants his tight ends to do. I think that he can be a glorified big body wide receiver. That's exactly what the Steelers need, especially because their wide receiver depth is so shaky. I think that they should pay him, but I can also see a scenario where he goes into the season without this extension and then maybe something gets done right before free agency. But of course, if you decide to wait and do that, you're going to be paying a premium. That's gambling and hoping that, well, hopefully he does well in this offense, but not so well that his price tag just increased a ton. So the Steelers have wanted to get something done. Pat Freiermuth's agent was up in Latrobe early in camp. Kind of felt like there might be some momentum towards something, but he left Latrobe without a deal. I think that, obviously if it's going to get done, it's going to happen in the next couple days because the season is about to start. But I think that clearing up the Ayuk situation, which while it felt like it was never going to happen, legitimately never felt like Ayuk was going to come to Pittsburgh, there was still enough of a what if that the Steelers didn't want to hamstring themselves by devoting money to Pat Freiermuth when they might need to get really creative to get Brandon Ayuk on their roster and work out an extension with him. And then, they get the Cam Heyward deal done. I think that one was easier because he's been a Steeler longer, because that deal's, I'm going to guess, pretty front loaded. And they have a lot of familiarity negotiating with him, and working this deal out with Pat Freiermuth is something of a new frontier. So I'm not surprised that it hasn't happened yet. I think I'm about 50-50 about whether or not it will happen. If I'm Omar Khan, I would make that deal because I think that he will be an important piece. And while Darnell Washington is an exciting possibility and has, I think, a lot of upside, I still think that Pat Freiermuth is the more well-rounded of the two and has, I think, the potential to be in Pittsburgh longer.
I agree. Just the way the natural skills he brings as a receiving tight end, those are things that I think that Darnell Washington is still trying to pave out in his game. He's a freak of an athlete, just a huge behemoth of a person that can move fast and hit hard, but needs to put it all together to be the kind of more complete receiving threat that Freiermuth is. And like, I agree with you, it would behoove the Steelers to not place that bet and then be wrong at the end of the season and then end up paying Pat Freiermuth big money. Because again, tight end money ain't that expensive. The most expensive tight end right now in the NFL is $17 million a year. That's Travis Kelce. I think that Pat Freiermuth's not looking for that kind of money, but give him like $14 million. I think that they can work that out while still having space to do other things right now. But the big thing that everyone was expecting to happen this offseason was the wide receiver move. The big move never came, and week 1 is upon us. Mike Tomlin had an interesting comment about the wide receiver room that I want to pick Brooke's brain about. We'll do that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Brooke Pryor. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is also brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, that's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for, and with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter with Brooke Pryor of ESPN. Brooke, I'm going to play this clip from Mike Tomlin, because the way that he takes this question about the Steelers wide receivers, because everybody and their mama swore the Steelers were going to do something with wide receiver. And I'll raise my hand in this too. I wasn't on the Brandon Ayuk train, but I was on the train that they were going to make some even like a small move, a smidgen, like let's go get Robert Cooks over here. This is someone, this guy over there. And they did none of that. They got some guys for the practice squad, and they have the same wide receivers they started training camp with. But so I thought there would be something there. But listen how Mike Tomlin responds about the Steelers wide receivers group, and then I wanted to get some thoughts of it. But here's Mike Tomlin.
Mike, you've added some new players at receiver. What have you learned about the depth you have in that receiver core?
I'm comfortable with the performance of these guys, man. Had some questions even dating back to the spring, and to be quite honest with you, I probably went in the receiver room about a couple of weeks into camp and told them that. I just believe in being really transparent. But the consistency in which those guys performed in Latrobe and through team development has made me more comfortable. And specifically, I'm talking about Scotty Miller and Van Jefferson, man. I just can't say enough about the consistency in which they performed, their floor, if you will. They behave like veteran NFL players, and that's provided some comfort in the midst of the transition that comes with dealing with new people and getting acclimated in that way.
So, Brooke, I hear Van Jefferson. We saw that. And I kind of hear Scotty Miller. But that's two receivers behind George Pickens. Calvin Austin, didn't hear his name in that statement. Didn't really see Calvin Austin do a whole lot in the preseason. Roman Wilson was hurt for pretty much all of camp and preseason. He's only now even starting really getting back to practice. Do you buy that Mike Tomlin's actually comfy with the Steelers wide receivers, or is this him kind of smiling and buying time for Omar Khan to do something in the background?
I do think he only mentioned Scotty Miller and Van Jefferson because of how the question was phrased, because Jeff specifically said new faces, and Mike is never going to give you more than what you ask for, like straight up. Like he's not going to take liberties with your question. He's not going to say, I think you really wanted to ask me about this. Like, he's going to answer the question exactly how you phrase it. And I do think that there was a lot of, I don't think Mike Tomlin will ever say that he's comfortable, but I think that there was comfort in how Van Jefferson and Scotty Miller performed throughout training camp, because I was surprised by how consistent Van was and Scotty was. I felt like each of them made a lot of plays. They did not make many mistakes. That to me speaks to what Tomlin was saying about they have a high floor. To me, that's kind of the theme of this offense is, hey, these guys have a high floor, which I'm still a little bit scarred by Kenny Pickett having a high floor and that being why the Steelers drafted him. That's not always the best reason to keep someone around or the best characteristic that you want out of your offense. But I think that Van Jefferson has been really steady and really solid. Scotty Miller, to me, I liked him a lot working with Justin Fields. I didn't see him or notice as many big plays with Russell Wilson. Doesn't mean it can't happen. It's just when I happen to notice it. I think that the Roman Wilson injury has been obviously a frustration point and a disappointment because they do need depth behind George Pickens. I thought that the questions that Will Graves asked today about how is George Pickens going to handle this extra attention were relevant questions. And honestly, probably my biggest one, because he's going to get absolutely blanketed by these defenses, and they already know how to get under his skin. There were several times last year where these DBs were trash talking him and he retaliated. And I think that he has to keep his cool because the guy playing opposite of him or guys playing opposite of him are not as strong of a receiver. And so they're going to have to step up and make plays, and George is going to have to keep his crap together. And hopefully that does enough to keep this offense rolling. But I'm going to need to see it. I'm going to need to see it in week one. This is, I think that Tomlin has to be optimistic at this point. He has to publicly support his wide receivers. He's not going to come out and say, yeah, we suck, we need to add somebody else, because that's just going to drive the price up on, anybody on the free agent market or a trade or anything like that. I think that they probably would want to add to that room, but I think that even they knew Ayuk was probably not going to happen. It's one of those right. If I do win the lottery, that'll be great. And, 7 out of my 8 numbers match, but I don't know that last one's going to line up. Like, maybe I'll win $100 instead of the millions. But I think they were pretty realistic about the fact that wasn't going to go down.
No, I think so too. This is stuff that you, me, several other reporters were kind of like, everyone was really excited about this, but it's like, I don't think they're gunning for it. They put an offer out like, hey, Niners, if everything goes to hell with Brandon Ayuk, guess what? There's this offer back here that you probably don't want to take, but it'll be your only offer. So I agree with you. I think that again, I don't think that there was a panic here. I think there is a quiet confidence the Steelers will be able to manage that. But I also think this confidence might also be more rooted in they're not going to ask a whole lot of these wide receivers. They're not going to ask Van Jefferson to get 1,000 yards this year. They're saying, hey, probably get 600-700 at most, and then, Pat Freiermuth will get a lot of targets, and on George Pickens, I think you bring up a great point, and Will Graves did too, about being double teamed. When we asked George Pickens during camp about being double teamed, he's like, oh, they double teamed me last year. And it's like, they did, but they also did with Deontay Johnson on the other side, and they had like there was a few other mitigating factors there that I think played into it. And I do think it's going to be another season where it's going to be a different kind of a season where George Pickens is going to have to keep his cool, learn how to operate as a number one that doesn't have a really great number 2 next to him that attracts that attention, because I do think Russell Wilson is the quarterback who can say, hey, you know what? You want to double cover with a safety over top of George Pickens? That's fine. I'll hit Van Jefferson over here. But if he does that for 2 or 3 games and George Pickens is averaging 4 catches for 50 yards and he's not getting his touchdowns, how will that play out? How will that work with George Pickens with how young he is? We know he's a very excitable guy, and he has kind of had these explosive reactions before. Those are some of the challenges I think the Steelers have to work on in the background. Or who knows? Maybe George Pickens has grown up out of in one off season, and that's not an issue. But I do think that's something the Steelers have to be mindful of.
Yeah, 100%. It is perfect that the Steelers' first game is in Atlanta, and that's the first chance that we're going to get to really watch George Pickens and how he handles himself in games. And when I think of the last time the Steelers played in Atlanta, it was George Pickens coming up the field screaming, "Throw me the effing ball." So that is, we could be in line for some interesting parallels.
It certainly could be. There's a lot of stuff leading up to Atlanta, though. We have our crossover Thursday episode coming up tomorrow with Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons. That's going to be a big episode. But Brooke, you do an amazing job as always. We're so thankful for you to come on this show. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
You can get all of my work on ESPN.com and on X/Twitter, whatever you want to call it, at BE Pryor.
Absolutely. She's Brooke Pryor of ESPN. Thank you, Brooke, for joining us. And thank you all for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here every day, Monday through Friday, talking about your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.